you ever wondered, can you communicate directly with spirit guides, teachers, or non-physical consciousness, or even our higher selves? What would they tell us? My name is Kevin Moore, and since 2015, I started to practice a form of communication which is termed channeling. I have been interviewing experts on my talk show to find out, does life continue after we die, and can we communicate with those that have crossed over? With each expert I spoke to, they all had different ideas. Is there knowledge from the past which could be shared with the present moment? So I thought, why not just speak to the non-physical world directly through channelers around the world? And that's what I set out to do. They Call Us Channelers will take the viewers on a journey into the phenomena known as channeling. And my main goal with this docuseries is to bring a new understanding and awareness to channeling by looking within ourselves and asking, is it truly possible that we can all use this innate ability?
The room is chosen to be ecumenical, so we have pictures of various religions here. James Tiburon, who is in charge of Earth Keepers, he's really into gems and crystals. He's the one that has sent us all these crystals you can see here.
Wow, Kevin.
That's a 700-pound.
Oh, it says do not touch. Oops.
I
Sorry.
noticed that, you know. No, that's all right. The stained glass windows were made by a woman named Frederica Fields, whose mother was very interested in Edgar Cayce. The mother got readings for everyone in the family, and Frederica forgot about it, and years later her mother died. Frederica was going through her mother's papers, came across a reading for her as a young girl. It talked about how eventually she'd become interested in stained prisms and glass, and Frederica had gone on to become a self-taught stained glass artist with windows in the Washington Cathedral and throughout Europe. So when this building was being built, she donated the windows to us.
And the view.
That's the Atlantic Ocean right there.
Oh my gosh. That's so beautiful. And how old is this building?
1974. There's an overview of our work's history, which you might want to look at later. That's pretty interesting. And our bookstore. There's 25 books by Kevin Todeschi in there you'll have to check out.
Who's that? He sounds interesting. I'll check him out.
This is the Edgar Cayce Hospital on the left. Cayce's dream was to have a hospital where people could come and get readings from him, and regular doctors, nurses, and therapists would carry out the treatment. And that's where our massage center is now, and that's where our cafe is where we give their lunch.
Okay.
But all these buildings have been renovated in the last 7 years. So here people can come here and relax and meditate. We have students from the Cayce Riley School of Massage. We have conferees. Right now our conference is on life coaching. And
wow.
So they're all on their lunch break.
It's really beautiful.
This is our press building. It's the piece on the left is the Education Center, which is an 11,000 square foot addition, and the piece on the right is an old cinder block building that I had covered with the same siding and added fake windows so it looks like it matches, so all the buildings look like they match.
Okay.
So when we go through the door, you're going to see we're in the shipping department. So this is actually our prison program. We have a prison program that's our most active service program. We send out free between 12 and 14,000 books free every year to prisoners. This is one day's mail to prisoners. All the books they've asked for or subjects they're interested in. So it's all spread by word of mouth. It's all free. A day's mail, they've already processed the mail. But this is what a day's mail looks like going out.
This is the prison program.
This is the prison program. And these are all the books that go out to the prison program.
That is amazing.
And the letters we get back from prisoners about how they used to blame other people for their life, they used to blame their parents, society, and now they understand they're responsible and they want to make a difference. It's truly rewarding.
And this is funded through the A.R.E?
All through the A.R.E, yeah. This is our copy center. So this is the old cinder block building. And when we added the new building, I had every floor match up. So this is the new education center. And this is This is really behind the scenes. This is the Edgar Cayce Foundation, where people don't usually come without me with them or something. But this is Edgar Cayce's desk. It really is. And he was also a photographer. And for some reason, he took a picture of his wall in April 1944. And so all those pictures, the archives duplicated on this wall, even down to the calendar. So that this is exactly what his office looked like. So there's all the pictures there.
That's incredible that you've lined it up. So this is what it would have looked like.
This is what it would look like, and that was his desk. And then everything here has an interesting story. This is a bust by Antonio Salemme. He was a bronze sculptor artist who did people like John F. Kennedy, Winston Churchill, Dwight Eisenhower, and he was in an Edgar Cayce study group in New York, and he actually did a bust of Edgar Cayce. So. And then I had the archives do a big picture overview of our building. So here's a hospital being built in 1928. There's Edgar Cayce staying out of what would become the hospital, and there's a hospital when it's completed. The press building, which is this building next to us where the prison program is, used to be a 2-story cinder block square where we did our publishing. And eventually when we had printing presses, we added the lower part here, and eventually we had our auditorium here. So originally our auditorium was in the hospital, and then we moved it to the second floor of the press building in 1968. And then the Visitor Conference Center was finished in 1975. There's Hugh Lynn Cayce building the Visitor Conference Center. That's where we now have conferences and all the readings in the bookstore. And then Kevin Todeschi built the Education Center in 2012, which is right next to the cinder block building, and then we wrapped it. There I am right there. And then we renovated the Cayce Hospital in 2014. There's the hospital the way it looked when we started, and here's how it looks now. And I'm going to show you the original Edgar Cayce readings. This is a vault that is surrounded on 6 sides by cement. And so here is the vault. These are the original Edgar Cayce readings, 14,306. And what happened is Gladys, Edgar Cayce's secretary, she would take in shorthand the notes, the readings notes, and then she would type them up with a carbon, and she'd send the original to the recipient, and she'd keep the carbon. And so the carbons, copies of the carbons, are essentially our copies of the Edgar Cayce readings. And so every reading has a folder like this, and then every reading will have background information. For example, in this one, Gladys made a note from January 12th, 1940 about the reading, and you can see the copies here. This is what the original papers look like. This is actually one of Edgar Cayce's readings for himself. And then every reading has background information, notes, copies of the carbon, follow-up information that happened, something that happened later. We have copies of everything, and all this information has been computerized, and that's what makes up the 24 million word Edgar Cayce database. At our 85th anniversary a couple years ago, I told those in attendance that in our 85-year history, only one expense has gone down here, and that's telegram expense. We used to spend $10 a year on telegrams. We don't have telegrams anymore. So, but here's what the original Edgar Cayce readings look like. All these file drawers.
And that lady there's responsible
She's the
for a
one
lot
responsible for keeping copies and keeping them all down by hand. She took copies of more than 95% of what we have. And then the Edgar Cayce Foundation, they actually continue to work with the people who had readings and get follow-up information. Karen, who works in the foundation, a couple of years ago, she decided to write to Edgar Cayce's photography school. He graduated from the School of Southern School of Photography. And here's a picture of his graduating class in 1904. She got a picture of the graduating class. And so the foundation is here, the Edgar Cayce Foundation. And we'll just go in here, this light should come on. And so the Coronet magazine was really like the Life magazine of its day. And in 1943, a woman named Marguerite Harmon Breaux wrote an article, Miracle Man of Virginia Beach, and that's what really started him getting bags of mail all the time, this article. And so the archives here keeps track of everything. It keeps track of the people who had readings. It keeps all the memorabilia. For example, that's Edgar Cayce's life seal made by a woman who used to know Edgar Cayce. It represents, the triangle represents his past life in Egypt. The 3 palm trees represent his life in Persia. The boat on the left represents the age of psychic forces. And then the 2 swans on the right represent his greatest fault, which was to want to take things too easily. Now, interestingly enough, there was a professional stained glass artist from the Edgar Cayce Center in Japan who came here last May and did a version in glass, which is over here. That's the best looking stained glass I've ever seen. In 2006, when Charles Thomas retired, there's the sign-off day there. Charles Thomas passed away a few years ago. You can see what the last 12 years have done to me. So one of the things we did when we renovated buildings is we added an elevator to every building. And this building got a storeroom. We've never had a storeroom before on site. So that's why we're really behind the scenes now. This is the building as our education center where we train people in massage. So the next floor is our massage school. And right now we have 3 semesters of massage students. I think the one semester graduates at the end of this month. Our top floor is Atlantic University. We have a university that has 2 master's degrees programs all online. One's a master's in transpersonal psychology, and one's a master's in leadership. And I was actually the first student to graduate from Atlantic University in 1989.
Do you have any students that come here at all for any of the courses that are masters? Or?
Yes, we have a couple of courses that have a residential component, like hypnotherapy, but you could do the whole master's without. Unfortunately, both of the classrooms are busy, otherwise I'd take you in there, but this classroom can hold 32 students, 16 on the table, 16 off. This one can hold 26, I believe. This is our anatomy classroom for the students. They're on a lunch break. And then this is the Edgar Cayce Hospital, which was built in 1926-27. And
do you have international students come here?
we do.
Yes.
And we have, we've graduated a lot of students from like Japan and Europe, and I think we had India. We actually, in terms of the university, we actually had 3 nuns in the same convent graduate from Atlantic University from Australia. So basically, we kept the, how do I turn this on? There we go. We kept all the molding. But this is what the Edgar Cayce hospital rooms look like. And the rooms in between were bathrooms that were shared with the other person. And so all these now are oceanfront massage rooms. Oceanfront massage rooms. We give between 200 and 400 services a week.
Oh my gosh.
So this is the waiting room in between services. So we do like massage, we do steams, we do colonics, we do regression therapies.
Well, Kevin Todeschi, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on the program.
It's great to be here. It's so wonderful to be here in the A.R.E. building here in Virginia Beach. My first time coming here.
You're welcome.
And behind us is the amazing readings, all the readings that Cayce gave.
Right, we have copies of 14,306 Edgar Cayce readings.
Wow.
And collectively, the Edgar Cayce database is 24 million words, so it's quite a collection.
And all that's available on the A.R.E. website as well?
Correct. A.R.E. members can look up any Edgar Cayce reading, and then individuals who are just interested can go to edgarcayce.org and see overviews of many different topics.
When did the readings start and when did they stop?
The first reading we have a notation of is Edgar Cayce's first reading on himself, which is in March of 1901. And he had been suffering from laryngitis for actually almost a year. And he was, the short story is he was invited to a stage show where there was a hypnotist who tried to put him to sleep. Cayce could not be put to sleep, but he could put himself to sleep. And while asleep, he spoke normally, even though he'd been suffering from laryngitis. And later on, another hypnotist had Cayce put himself to sleep. And while asleep, he asked Cayce what was wrong with him and how he could get well. And Cayce's response was that it was a psychological condition producing a physical effect and could be removed by suggestion. And that's really the first reading we have from March 1901. And then the last reading we have is in 1944. Edgar Cayce's reading on himself, actually. He had been overworking. The readings had told him to never give more than 2 a day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. Because of publicity and World War II, so many people were writing to him asking for help. he asked his secretary, Gladys Davis, to book ahead because there were bags of mail in the Cayce home, and he said just walking by the bags he could feel the pain. And he eventually had a stroke, and he got a reading on himself and asked, you know, how long am I supposed to rest? And the answer was until you're well or dead. And he passed away in January of 1945. And when he died, they were booked 8 readings a day, 2 years in advance.
That's incredible. I mean, he died way too young, but then we have to go back to 1944, was it?
He died in 45, he had the
45.
stroke in 44, yeah.
Sorry. The average age of living back then would have been a lot less than it is nowadays.
It was, but he died just before his 67th birthday, so probably even for the time that was not very old. His youngest son lived to be in his 80s, so.
Right, yeah, as comparison, yeah. And was he looking after himself?
Probably to the same extent most of us do. We know what we're supposed to do, and we don't always do exactly what we're supposed to do.
Because he was a full-time smoker as well.
He was a smoker. He worked too hard. He kept pushing himself. He really wanted to help people. And he felt like he was supposed to do something that would make a difference.
He loved people, though, didn't he?
He loved people. He actually had portraits, pictures of many of the people he gave readings to in his office.
Yeah, he has touched and continues to touch the lives of so many people. So how did this all start for you then? How did you get involved in the Cayce work?
Well, I'll tell you how I first found out about my impact, and then what really grabbed me. When I was 16 years old, in the 11th grade, we have this thing in the United States called boys' state. We have a girls' state too, but basically the idea is you go off for a week at college and you learn about the government. You learn about the judiciary and the executive branch and Congress, and it's really for people who might be interested in government work. And so a teacher had recommended me for boys' state, and I went. And I hate to say that by Wednesday of that week, I was bored out of my mind. So I thought the last thing I want to do is go into the government. So I went to the student bookstore, and the book that jumped out at me was a book called A Prophet in His Own Country, The Story of the Young Edgar Cayce by Just Stern. And I got that book, and I finished reading it for the rest of the week we were there. And I never used to tell this story until 12 years ago when I became CEO, and now I tell it. I read that book, and when my parents came and picked me up, my father asked me how the week was, and I said, Dad, we were in Colorado. I said, Dad, I'm supposed to move to Virginia Beach, and I'm supposed to be president of A.R.E. And it was just like instant, this is something I'm supposed to do. And shortly thereafter, when I started going to school, I had a really hard time with allergies. The doctor said I was allergic to every tree, bush, and shrub that grew in the state of Colorado. So I started working with the Cayce Information on allergies, and honestly, I don't even take pills anymore because they were so helpful in helping my body get rid of the allergies. And that really grabbed me, that Cayce was right about allergies, and he's been right about so many other things. But those two things were really connected me to this work.
And isn't that incredible that you've manifested that in your life, that you are now the head director of the A.R.E.
Yeah.
And that came to fruition. I mean, we do create a reality then, don't we?
I think that's part of it. I also think there's because there was definitely that affinity with this work and having a hand in helping to create it. But I think there's also a past life connection with this work, that Cayce would say that this work has been going on for a very long time, and I've had dream experiences that suggest that I have been a part of the Cayce work. Once I worked with him as a dream interpreter, which sounds unusual, but in this life I had a knack for dream interpretation. I really didn't know why. I've literally interpreted thousands of dreams, and I had this experience once. It was a waking experience where I was in the desert. Cayce said this work was once located in Persia, and that I was in a community of dream interpreters, and people would come and tell us their dream, and we'd help them. And at the end of that experience, they paid me for it, and it was like wow, I've interpreted thousands of dreams. No one's given me a nickel. It used to be a job, so I feel like that was a valid past life experience.
Isn't that interesting? So do you feel, what year were you born?
In 1958.
And do you feel that an aspect of your soul, some part of it was with Cayce when he was?
No, not during his 1945. No, this was he gave readings on a civilization he said existed in Persia thousands of years ago. He said it was called the City in the Hills and the Plains. It had started out as a trading city, but eventually grew to be kind of like spiritual emissaries to all parts of the world, and that people in this work had been a part of that as well. And I feel like I had been in that group.
Okay, so there's an affinity with the Cayce soul lineage, if you want to call it that.
The soul group. Cayce said
Soul
we often
group.
go back in soul groups,
Yeah.
soul families, meeting the same people over and over again to continue to improve our relationships or to help heal them.
And do you recognize that group with the people here nowadays, some of them?
I've come to believe that we have multiple soul groups, so that sometimes it's kind of like an experience of cycles. Well, you'll be with a group of people for a while, and then there's a cycle change, and some of them go off to another cycle, and new people come on, and yet there's a stable group that stays. So I think we have different soul groups that we encounter over time.
What changes have you made since being here then?
I think that the things that I have felt called to do are to renovate our entire facility. So we've had a major renovation campaign. We hadn't done any renovations here in almost 40 years. So we've renovated every building, brought it into the 21st century. And while we've done that, we've created all kinds of technology that goes along with it. So that when I started here 35 years ago, there was, of course, no such thing as email. There was no computer. There was nothing. Now we have essentially a digital component of everything we do. So whether it's a conference or a study group or the Edgar Cayce readings online, you can go online and take advantage of this work in ways that Edgar Cayce and those who came after couldn't even have imagined. We have hundreds of programs on YouTube. You can actually watch me age over the last 30 years on YouTube, so it's a fascinating experience. But everything that we do is now available online for people all over the world.
And there's Cayce centers throughout the world?
There's Cayce centers in about 30 countries. Our biggest center next to the United States is in Japan, the Edgar Cayce Center in Japan. They have a core group of about 1,000 members in Tokyo. They do monthly programs. The head of the Cayce Center, Shigeru Matsuda, travels up and down Japan giving programs and lectures. And I'm actually leading a tour to Japan next July to meet with them.
Okay. So let's just go back to basics here. How would you describe Cayce to anyone that's never come across him?
Edgar Cayce is the most documented psychic of all time. For 43 years of his adult life, between 1901 and 1944, he was able to put himself to sleep on a couch. We still have the couch here in our library. And while asleep, he could be given the name and address of anyone anywhere in the world. He could tune into that person, outline what was wrong with them, how they could get well. So by far, the bulk of the readings we have copies of are related to health and well-being. And then along 1923, an individual asked for a horoscope to see if Edgar Cayce could give a horoscope. And during the course of that reading, Cayce said something like, many of the situations that were occurring in the person's life in the present were very similar to when he had once been a monk. And that opened up the door to reincarnation. And later on, Edgar Cayce's secretary, Gladys, went back and found that Cayce had referred to reincarnation as early as 1911, but nobody knew what he was talking about. But that opened up a door to past life readings, which we have about almost 2,000 of them. Later on, we had mental spiritual readings, readings on business advice. In total, the Cayce database talks about 10,000 different topics. So regardless of your field of inquiry, your background, your areas of interest, people just like you and I ask Edgar Cayce about how to find their mission in life, how to improve their relationships, what they could do about a serious illness, how they could learn how to have a closer walk with God, whatever it might be.
So 9,000 of those bulk of those readings, 9,000 were medical readings.
Correct.
So you've got cures to all sorts of issues: cancer, eye health issues,
psoriasis, scleroderma, arthritis, allergies. I usually say A to Z. You can go acne to varicose veins, and there's information in the Cayce database.
And these readings for people back, 60 years or more, they're still current today?
Well, this is the way we work with them. Let's say that Cayce gave readings to a couple hundred people who had arthritis. Now, of course, people are individual and they all have their own needs and wants and their own physical bodies. But if in all those readings for arthritis, Cayce mentioned a dozen of the same things, then what the health database does, and the health database is open to anyone, even if you're not a member, you can go to edgarcayce.org, look up an illness, and you'll get a treatment protocol of what Edgar Cayce would have said related to something like arthritis. Changes in diet, peanut oil massages, things like that.
And of course, the language that Cayce used back in the day was a language of a Christian man because he was heavily into Christianity.
Sure. As a conscious man, he was very biblically oriented. He read the Bible once through for every year of his life, but so much of what's in the readings was not necessarily in accord with what Christianity would have said at the time. Reincarnation being one of the things, energy medicine, the fact that psychic ability is a natural aspect of the soul, many, many things. And so I think Cayce found great solace in reading the Bible and seeing that it's actually filled with psychic experiences. It's got stories of reincarnation. So many of the things that he thought discovering for the first time actually had been detailed many, many thousands of years earlier in the Bible.
Now, when he was a child, there was an angelic vision that he had with a woman that came to him, and that he basically said that to this vision that he wanted to help people,
especially children when they were sick. That became a motivating influence for him. Yeah,
especially children when they were sick, and that's when his gift opened up. I think in the sense that he could go to sleep on books. Was that the vision happened? Then he was able to go to sleep.
But
on
it
books?
Was right thereafter that he was not a great student, and his father, who was called the squire, was somewhat stern. And he had been practicing the spelling lesson, and he couldn't spell cabin, which sounds like a very easy word to spell. I mean, C-A-B-I-N, how hard can that be? But he just couldn't get it, and his father got very upset and apparently swacked him and left the room. And Edgar said he heard this woman's voice that he had just seen, and she told him to fall asleep and they could help him. So he fell asleep on his school book, and when he woke up, his father was frustrated, he'd fallen asleep, but when he woke up, he said he knew what was in the book. So his father asked him to spell cabin, and he was able to do it. And he told his father to call any page in the book. And so his father would call it a page number. And Edgar Cayce could see in his mind every word on that page just from having slept on it. Now that's great for something like a history lesson or English. It doesn't help you do a math problem. I mean, it's not going to help you solve math. But somehow he was able to retain a photographic record of the book. And he actually used that talent when he wanted to get a job in a bookstore. And they said they didn't need any help. So he asked for a copy of their inventory, and he slept on it, and he memorized their inventory. Now, when I read that when I was a teenager, I tried sleeping on a book. It didn't do anything for me, but somehow he was able to tune into what was inside.
So, obviously this documentary I'm filming, I've interviewed over 50 plus channelers right now, and there'll be many more to come, right? Would you equate Edgar to a channeler, a modern day channeler?
Well, he preferred to call himself a psychic diagnostician or a clairvoyant. There were other channelers around at the time, Eileen Garrett being one of them. She worked with a channel named Yvonne. And Cayce said that rather than using a channel or another spirit, he basically used his own higher self to travel to what he called the Akashic Records, a record of all time and space, the past, present, and unfolding future. And he suggested that way his information was not shaded by another being's thoughts, inclinations, desires, or feelings.
There are those that I'm going to meet that do channel their higher self. I think that's partly what we all do when we channel.
Correct.
It's just, it can come out as a label so that maybe it allows us to take not as much responsibility for it. Yeah.
And I've met people who actually channel an aspect of a personality from another life. So it's actually their higher self or a part of themselves from another time period.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes, I think Daryl Anker does that when he channels Bashar.
Okay.
I've interviewed Daryl, and he said it's a future aspect of himself.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Does the A.R.E. support other channelers? Is that
we have a variety of intuition and psychic programs here where we bring in mediums, we bring in channels, we bring in psychics, and the goal in the Cayce material is really to help people to become their own psychic, but very often when people need help, they need another third party to come to. And so we have, for example, a psychic list, people who've been on our programs, and Cayce often said we were our own best psychic, but obviously people went to him whenever they needed help as well.
Do you think, as you say that, the Cayce says we're our own best psychic, there's always that inner voice, isn't there? And we tend to ignore that inner voice sometimes.
Yeah.
That inner voice that just knows, that's always wise, that's always there to look after us.
Yeah.
Maybe it's our voice projecting back, but it's that wiser part of us.
Absolutely.
Where does it come from? What would Cayce say it came from? Is it the higher self it's coming from? Is the higher self the soul?
I think the higher self is definitely an aspect of the soul. And Cayce gave a suggestion when we're facing a decision to the best of your ability, make the choice, yes or no. And then when you can, become quiet and try to become centered and meditate for a little while. And then at the end of the meditation, ask yourself the question again. And then ask yourself yes or no. And see if your calm, centered, meditative self has the same answer. Another suggestion he gave was to basically think about a question before you go to bed. I often write out the question and to dream on it and watch your dreams and see what happens. And I can tell you over and over and over again, I have gotten valid, helpful, and accurate advice from the dream state. And part of the reason, a lot of people don't realize this, but, and this is science, it's not Edgar Cayce. Science has proven that essentially 95% of the stimulus and information coming to us every day is set aside. It's ignored by the conscious mind. For example, you're not listening to the sound of that heating and air conditioning system, or you don't feel your arms on the chair or your feet on the floor or your glasses on your nose unless I point it out, because the conscious mind decides irrelevant. But it's all set aside in the subconscious. And so when we dream, all the stimuli we've seen during the day, all the people we've heard kind of talking quietly, comes to our forefront, and that information is made available to us. And that's really why if someone's at a crime scene and they're hypnotized, they can remember more that went on during the crime scene under hypnosis than they're aware of consciously.
How much did Cayce practice with hypnosis past that event that happened in 1923?
He basically had an unusual talent of just putting himself to sleep. I mean, he could just close his eyes, he would fold his hands over his stomach, he would watch for a flash of light, and according to his wife, as soon as he saw the flash of light, his eyes would start to flutter, and she'd give him a suggestion, you will find so-and-so at such and such a place, and he would go into the sleep state. And while in that state, he didn't remember anything he said. It was only when he woke up and they'd tell him what he had said that he was aware of it.
On my journey, I've only met a few deep trance channelers. Would you call him a trance channeler? But
well, Cayce had a reason for actually, I mean, this is going to sound kind of unusual, but he said basically in his previous life, he had been an individual named John Bainbridge, and he had used his psychic ability for selfish purposes, to gamble, to get ahead, to pick up loose women, or anything you can imagine. And he said it was for that reason that in this lifetime, every time he gave a reading, he had to set self aside by going to sleep, because he had misused the ability last time around.
wow, that's interesting.
So that's why he had to go to sleep.
But is that the same, is that going to sleep the same as some of the people that I've seen that trance channel that come out of that channeling and like, what did I say?
Well, I think it depends on the individual. I mean, I've seen Kevin Ryerson, for example. He's a great trance channel, and he brings in different individuals and some very helpful information. And I would think that Kevin would say that either some of the channels are aspects of his own personality or individuals he knew in previous incarnations or was acquainted with.
Yeah, again, you associate that a bit with what Cayce was saying earlier on as well, with the way that he brought in the information and the past life connections that he has. Was there any readings where it was kind of future life readings that were affecting the present moment?
Well, there was a dream he had that I think people have taken out of context, but I'll give you that dream. He was in Detroit, and he was trying to help people. He was arrested for practicing medicine without a license. He was sent to jail. He was depressed to the depths of his soul, probably wondering, if I'm supposed to do this work that's, people are criticizing, why am I going to jail? So on the way back from Detroit on the train, he had a dream. And in the dream, he was born again in Nebraska, which was a coastline city. It was the year 2108, and he remembered being Edgar Cayce, and he told scientists he remembered being Edgar Cayce, and they took him to Virginia Beach, and there was evidence of this work still happening. Now, lots of people have said since that time, Edgar Cayce predicted that Nebraska would be the coastline, we'd have all these earth changes. That's not what Cayce said. He actually gave a reading on that dream. And they asked him, what's this about? And he said, this is the interpretation. He says that twice. This is the interpretation. Though the heaven and earth be removed, in other words, even if you're arrested
for practicing medicine without a license, your work will survive. And so the dream was really about encouragement, not to become troubled about being arrested. That would pass, that his work would last long after his passing. It was not about earth changes. It was about the lasting legacy of the Cayce information.
Absolutely. There is one fellow out there, David Wilcock, that talks about that he feels that he's the reincarnation of Cayce. Have you come across that?
I've met David. I've talked to David. I think David's a great guy, and I think he's a very talented individual. But David has been interviewed by myself and a number of people here, including Edgar Cayce's youngest son before he died, and none of us think David was Edgar Cayce. It's not just David. There are so many people who claim to be the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. We actually have a form letter for it, of why that experience occurs and what to do about it. But we don't think Edgar Cayce is back.
Is that what Dolores Cannon would call maybe a walk-in, where you're, before you come consciously here, you're taking the imprint of someone else's life and getting some experience from that?
It might be, but I think a better example is when Edgar Cayce was alive, there was an individual who came to him. He had memories of being President James A. Garfield, who was one of the United States' presidents, lesser-known presidents. And he had a psychic who told him that he was President James A. Garfield. And Edgar Cayce gave a reading on him and told him that he had not been Garfield, that he had been a good friend of Garfield's, and he had so emulated Garfield, like here's what I really wanted to be like, that he had kind of taken on that personality in the present. And so I think that's part of it. I also think that we have people we've been with through history, like the soul groups again, and very often we associate with one of those periods in history and take on that personality. But I do not think Edgar Cayce is back.
What about those who talk about that Cayce is working on a panel with them in the ethereal realm or the spiritual realm? These are just human words for it. And that he's not giving medical readings, but he's on that panel with him, and they bring that aspect of him through sometimes.
Well, I'm sure that Edgar Cayce, wherever he is or whatever he's doing, is continuing to help people. I will tell you that Hugh Lynn Cayce, who was Edgar Cayce's eldest son, he's long passed away. He used to tell this experience. He had a lecture in New York where there were it was, I believe, for the American Psychical Association, and there were a number of psychics in the audience. And he told this experience because he used to basically say, well, the real Edgar Cayce, please stand up. And after his lecture talking about the Cayce work, a woman came up to him and said that she was in communication with Edgar Cayce, and that Cayce felt like Hugh Lynn had gotten off track and that he needed to close down the organization, and he wasn't doing what he had wanted him to do, and he needed to basically give up the work. And Hugh Lynn thanked the woman, said that wasn't his experience, but thanked him, and she sat down, and someone else got up and said they were in communication with Edgar Cayce, and Edgar Cayce was so happy with all that was going on in Virginia Beach, and they really giving him the thumbs up and to just keep on keeping on to move this work forward. So I think sometimes people think they may be in communication with someone, and after all, Cayce would say, discarnates lie. I mean, if I'm a plumber from Ohio that's deceased, who's going to listen to me? But if I say, you know what, I was so-and-so, I used to be an Old Testament prophet, I'm going to perhaps listen more to that individual. Okay. Let me tell you one more story. A.R.E. Abramson, who passed away, he was a very good psychic, well known in the 60s and 70s, A.R.E. Abramson. And I was with him once, and he told me he had an experience he had had that really made him sit up and take notice. And someone had asked him for a reading on earth changes. And so Aaron described going to the Hall of Records, and he'd get to the Hall of Records, and he's looking for information on earth changes, and all at once someone shows up and starts telling Aaron all that's going to happen. And then someone else shows up, and he's got 4, 5, 6 people telling him all these horrible things are going to happen. And as soon as he's trying to remember all this information, all at once there was a flash of light, and Jesus appeared in the midst of them, and he asked Aaron, "What are you doing?" And Aaron said, "I'm getting a reading on earth changes." And Jesus said, "This woman was a housewife, this man was a businessman, this guy was a plumber, this person was a stockbroker, and they're just giving you their opinions. They're not necessarily in tune with what's really going on." And I think very often that's what happens.
Which goes to show that even when you've crossed over, the future on this reality, we're still making it. It is not set.
Right, we're creating the future all the time. And the Akashic Records, which is one of the topics Cayce talked about a great deal, is constantly creating probable realities. And those realities change based on our choices and decision in the present.
Would they be living out as though they're as real as this, do you think?
The question is there multiple timelines where those things could be living out? That is a probability. My sense is that the Cayce information talks about the fact that the only real moment is now, that outside of the Earth, there is only now. And so this is a real mind stretcher to think about, but at one level, the past, the present, and the future are always being created and changing.
So the past changes the future changes the past, the present moment changes the past changes the present moment. It's all linked, it's all the same.
I believe so. It's hard to wrap your mind around that.
Well, when someone's then saying, Cayce has told me this or Cayce is telling me that, is the spirit world multidimensional as well?
I think the spirit world is multidimensional, and I think that there is a personality thought form that continues to exist long after a person is gone, and so it is possible to tune into someone's thought form, even though they may be back. Let's say Edgar Cayce is back, and he's in Europe, and he's doing something else.
Yeah.
It is possible probably to tune into the personality of Edgar Cayce.
So as you change your reality, maybe the guys that you connect with aren't the same multidimensional guys you were connecting with yesterday, because you've changed something.
Absolutely.
And you've shifted. And maybe when we change, it's not this physicalness that's changing, it's the consciousness that's shifting somewhere else into some other probable reality. I don't know, right?
And it's hard to keep track of it all.
And does it matter?
It does not matter.
No.
I mean, we're here basically, Cayce would say, to bring spirit into the earth, just transform the earth. That's why we're here.
Yeah, not to be too much in the monkey mind, I think. And it's great to talk about this. Obviously, to talk about this must mean that we're ready to see a greater reality, right?
Yeah.
But it's still, we still are working on this, aren't we?
I've had, a couple of experiences out of time, and so I know they exist. I don't think you can force them to happen, but I do think people have had experiences out of time. People have written to me about them all the time. It's an unusual experience where somehow time and space do not act linear anymore.
Just keeping on the David Wilcock thread as well, I was watching Cosmic Disclosure just recently, and he was talking about Cayce being in tune with some negative entities sometimes, in the sense of there was a reading that he did for California falling into the, collapsing and, earthquakes destroying it and then ending up part of the coast in the sea. And he was saying there was a being that was coming through at the time that started with an H. I can't remember the name right now.
Halaliel.
Halaliel.
Halaliel. Some of this is being taken out of context, but let me give you two different...
That's why I want you to answer it.
So there's one reading that I hate to say that prior to my being here, A.R.E. used to quote a lot, talking about earth changes, and it goes something like this. The earth will be broken up in many places. The early portion will see a change in the physical aspect of the west coast of America. Europe will change as in the twinkling of an eye. The greater portion of Japan must fall into the sea. And that reading has been quoted, not anymore, but over and over and over and over again. What they never quote is the question. And the question was, what changes can we expect for 1936? Now, people hear that and they think, oh, Edgar Cayce was wrong. But we need to look at that a little deeper. In 1936, Hitler invaded the Rhineland. There was civil war in Spain, and China and Japan went to war. And events were laid for World War II, and Europe was changed as in the twinkling of an eye, and the Empire of Japan, meaning the emperor, basically lost his power. So I think that reading actually occurred, but it was a vibrational change. It was not a physical earth change. On another occasion, in terms of Halaliel, there was a group of people studying the Edgar Cayce information on personal spirituality, which is one of the things we continue to do this day, help people become more in tune with their spiritual best self, soul self. And during the course of that reading, while Cayce was asleep, a voice spoke and identified himself as an archangel named Halaliel and encouraged them to get information from him. Well, on further questioning and some of the answers, it becomes very clear that Halaliel seems to be the archangel of karma. Now, if you had your choice between going with karma or grace or spirit, what are you going to pick? So eventually the group went with spirit and grace. Now, I can say, from Halaliel's perspective, all these horrible negative things are going to happen. This is what mankind has brought upon himself. But as we said earlier, I think we can all make choices that change the impact of things that we're drawing to ourselves.
Yes, because it was termed that Halalia was a mischievous.
Well, mischievous may not be the right word, but he was definitely a karmic influence.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we basically in life, from Cayce's perspective, there are two laws that help us to learn everything that we need to know. The law of karma or the law of grace. Now, karma suggests that if I kick you 10 times, you're going to kick me back 10 times. But grace suggests, you know, I realize I should have never kicked Kevin to begin with. And as soon as I get that awareness, I supersede the law of karma. I don't have to go through all the experiences. So they're both about changing our awareness, but one is about jot and tittle every single time, and the other one is about somehow rising to a new level of awareness.
I think Halalia was mentioned as when they were talking about, you know, that you can pick up on, you know, interference or, you know, not always the best sourced material.
Right.
Because there's lots of different things you can pick up on.
There's lots of different levels of
but
information.
I don't think Halalia was a great example of that, though.
No, I think Halalia has a job, and you know, Cayce would say that there was a fall of the angels, he would say, but it wasn't that a group of angels became devils. Instead, as soon as humankind started choosing things out of accord with what was spirit or divine, a group of angels volunteered and said, we will usher them in. So I think there are different levels of influence, and you know, people draw to themselves exactly what they need when they need it.
Thank you so much for clearing that up as well. Just with Cayce, Mrs. Cayce.
Gertrude, yeah.
Gertrude, we don't often hear enough about her. She must have played a pivotal role in Cayce's progression as well.
She did. She was, I got to know both of Edgar Cayce's sons to some extent. Edgar Evans, his youngest son who lived the longest, said that she basically kept the family together, that there was never enough money. They were always impoverished. Cayce would give readings for people even if they couldn't afford it. And you know, sometimes we tell people we're involved in reincarnation or metaphysics or psychic ability, and they think it's weird. Imagine what they thought 100 years ago. So sometimes he was having a hard time making ends meet, but she kept everyone together. But more than that, I think she and Gladys and Edgar, they had such a goal of helping people that threesome created kind of energetic vortex that was really helpful to other people, and people got the help that they sought. Before Gertrude was there, she was the conductor. She would help Edgar Cayce go to sleep, give him the suggestion that sometimes Cayce's father would be the one conducting the readings, and Gertrude wouldn't be there. She'd be somewhere else or before they were married. And Cayce would often wake up with a headache and feel horrible after giving a reading and didn't know why. And eventually he discovered that although his father was getting information for the readings, when that was over with, his father would ask for tips like on the local horse race or in the stock market. And he was making money on the side from his son's talent, and it was making Edgar Cayce sick. So when he discovered that essentially his father was taking advantage of him, he made it so that only Gertrude would conduct the readings from there on out.
I never knew that.
Yeah, there was a doctor named Dr. Wesley Ketchum, and the squire, they were good old boys from Kentucky, and they'd get the information from the reading, then they'd get tips on the horse races.
And it was never meant to be used for that?
It was not meant to be used for that, no, not at all.
Now, Tesla, Cayce, as far as I know, he did give readings to Tesla, and there was Edison as well, was it? Thomas Edison?
And supposedly Woodrow Wilson, yes.
What happened to the readings for Tesla and Edison?
There are a number of readings for famous people that we do not have copies of. All we have is anecdotal stories. Supposedly he gave a reading for Woodrow Wilson. He was supposedly sworn to secrecy, but we have no copy of it. Supposedly he was in New York at the same time Tesla was and gave readings for Tesla. And the book Edgar Cayce, An American Prophet by Sidney Kirkpatrick talks about all these various readings for famous people that we do not have, and talks about what anecdotal evidence that does exist. But those readings are not contained in the 14,306 that we have copies of.
Now, isn't that incredible? Do you think they were kept out because they just weren't, it was information that wasn't supposed to be released to the public?
It could be. It's also, I mean, we saw what happened when Ronald Reagan was supposedly getting information from an astrologer. I mean, it became a bad thing. So I'm sure that they tried to keep it under wraps. We have this man from Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And let me tell you the connection with Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson's, one of his Secret Service guys was named Colonel Starling. Colonel Starling was born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, which is where Edgar Cayce was from. They grew up together. So Colonel Starling was a connection with Edgar Cayce. He was also Woodrow Wilson's head security guard. So I'm sure that's how the connection happened. And in fact, eventually Colonel Starling wrote a book about his life story and included the Woodrow Wilson part, but did not talk about Edgar Cayce. So there's definitely anecdotal connections, but we don't have any proof.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so just getting back to dreams and the Akashic Records, just for anyone that's watching this as well, what is the Akashic Records and why do they matter?
Well, basically the Akashic Records is, for lack of a better word, let's call it the universe's supercomputer system, or the mind of God. And everyone is in touch with the records all the time. Basically, you meet someone for the very first time and you don't like that person, or you meet them and you have a real affinity toward them and you don't know why. We pick up our relationships exactly where we left them off, and those experiences are stored in the Akashic Records. And probably most of your listeners have heard about a near-death experience where people almost die and they have a life review, and just before they cross that final countdown, they're brought back. And they talk about how they had a life review and they saw everything that happened in their life. They're tuning into their own Akashic record. So the record is, in terms of the past, is a record of everything a soul has ever done, and we get credit for that. And in terms of the present, the Akashic records of the present draw to us exactly what we need, exactly when we need it, with the idea that we become a better person. And from the reading's perspective, the way this works is that if I, Kevin, really screw up this time around, the next lifetime I'm going to have a much more limited parameter of choice, because the universe is only going to let me get into so much trouble. And then if another life I do things really in accord with spirit, I'll have much wider parameters of choice. There's this ebb and a flow with free will, because the Akashic Records are trying to move me to become a more conscious spiritual being. And then every choice and decision I make sets in motion another probable reality. And all of us tune into those probable realities all the time. So we just don't know that that's what we're doing. And the way we experience it is we're driving somewhere and we think, wait a minute, I'm already been to this place. Or we're having a conversation with a friend, we think, wait a minute, I've already had this conversation. And we have an experience called deja vu. Cayce would say that most deja vu experiences are actually us tuning in to the Akashic Records of the future as our mind is contacting probable realities. If Kevin does this, here's the outcome. Kevin does this, here's the outcome. And we're dreaming about the future as it's unfolding.
Thank you. And again, obviously you've done a book on dreams as well. Dreams is a very important part of the research here. So, you know, the power in dreams basically is, do they allow us to see the bigger nature of reality, that we're a soul having a human experience? They get us to allow us to experience that aspect?
They allow us to experience everything from physical issues to relationship problems to unfolding the future. Let me give you two quick examples. We have a massage school here to train these people how to become massage therapists. And once I had a class where a student had a dream, and in the dream she opened the fridge and every single shelf was filled with orange juice. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out she needs more vitamin C in her diet. I mean, that's very simple. In terms of the future, 25 years ago my wife and I built a home out in the country, and it was on 3.5 acres. And the surveyors had gone out and plotted out where to put the foundation. And this is before cell phones. And so the builder called me at work the next day and said they've plotted where they're going to put the house. They're going to pour the concrete tomorrow. I said, great, for the foundation. That night I had a dream. And in the dream, my wife and I go to the house, and it's beautiful, just like we had designed it. It was a Victorian house that we had built. And when we walk in the front door, I start hearing this chewing sound, like someone's chewing something, chewing. And we walk to the back, and in the dream, the neighbors had horses, and the horses have their head over the fence, and they're eating off my porch. And I woke up thinking, you know, if you have 3.5 acres, and your house is supposed to be in the middle of the property, and yet somehow the horses are eating off your back porch, that house is too far back to the property line. So I drove out to the site, and in all honesty, the surveyors had made a mistake, and they'd put the house 50 feet back further than it was supposed to be. I ran to the 7-Eleven, drove to the 7-Eleven, called the builder, stopped the trucks, because it's been laid out wrong. And they had to go another day, and that was a true dream. Cayce would say nothing of significance ever happens to us without it first being foreshadowed in a dream.
Right, so it comes to a dream first, but it's not always, the dream isn't giving us the exactness of the situation. It's done in a way where we still have to take responsibility for it and come up with our own decision on what that might
It
mean.
is, and it's also, the people usually say, you know, well, why are dreams so complicated? Well, the language of the brain is symbols. It's not English or French or whatever your language, so you have to really work through the symbols and try to figure out what those symbols mean to you. But generally, thematically, what is happening to who's running from what, whatever it might be, you can get a sense of what the dream is about and get some real guidance in your life.
Thank you for that. What is the future of the A.R.E. then? What's your vision for the A.R.E. in the future with this work as well?
It's multifaceted. I think on one level, there are so many people in the world who are still wondering, why am I here? What's the purpose of life? What's going on? And we find that because people are searching, but they don't know what they're searching for. So they turn to drugs, they turn to alcohol, they turn to psychedelic experiences. And the heart of the matter is we are here to discover who we truly are as spiritual beings having a physical experience and our relationship with the divine. And I think that the Cayce information provides a wealth of information of how people can get in touch with their soul self. We're also, I think, here because people have all kinds of pains and hurts, and whether it's the loss of a loved one or a physical problem or a relationship they need help with, whatever it might be, the Cayce information continues to be a font of information. And so my dream, my goal, is that regardless of where you are in the world, at some point, you will be able to access information from the Cayce information that can be helpful to transform your life, physically, mentally, and spiritually, in a way that you can understand it.
Could this be a uniter one day for all channelers?
I think so. I think that one of Cayce's dreams was to bring together people from all backgrounds, from all disciplines, psychic experience, from all religious backgrounds, and to have a place where they could share ideas and exchange things. And I think our prayer group is a perfect example of that. We've had people in the prayer group who are every religious background, Baptist, Catholic, Mormon, agnostic, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, whatever it might be, learning how to pray together. And I think that was his goal, to have an organization where people from every discipline could come together and share and exchange.
Do you think most religious prophets were channelers back in the day? They were channeling the information?
Honestly, I don't know the answer to that question. I think that it probably depends on the individual in terms of what they experienced and how they shared it with other people. I mean, I've had psychic experiences that I would describe it, rather than channeling something, as like seeing a slide drop in front of your eyes. It's like something just drops in front of your eyes and you see it and then it's gone. That to me is somehow something's being downloaded from the Akashic Records or something.
Downloaded, that's another word. Is that just another word for channeling?
Well, I guess it would depend on how you define channeling. Yeah, it could be, absolutely.
There's many definitions on it. I'm actually going to go see the guy who's done the PhD book. You probably know the guy, Dr. John Clemo, done the Defining Book on Channeling. It's based out in California, and he would say there's many modalities of channeling. It's not just one fits all. There's many. Even the psychic is channeling.
We have a long-time scholar, a teacher, writer named Henry Reed, who wrote a book called Channeling Your Higher Self, and it's all about opening yourself up to your best self, divine self, so that higher information can come through.
Why are we here? What is the purpose, as Edgar Cayce would see it, for us having a human experience?
We have a global purpose that unites us all, and we have an individual purpose. So our individual purpose might be something like learning how to be a better parent, learning how to love unconditionally, learning how to improve our own self-esteem. So we have individual purposes that we're working on in any given incarnation. In terms of a global purpose, I think Cayce would say that the creative forces God turned us loose on the earth to bring divinity into the third dimension. So we are here to bring the Godhead into the third dimension. That's why we're here. You can look around at the earth and say, we're not doing that well right now, but that's our job, to somehow bring spirit into the earth. And we're not done until that happens.
And for those that will have this lifetime where they never even look into these subjects or never come across them, is that their soul's path not to do that?
Well, I think what happens is that, let's say we have our main job right now is to work on self-esteem. If I don't do that, I'm going to keep coming up against self-esteem issues, and I'm never going to branch any further. But I think that once you do this lesson, then it opens the door to the next one, and the next one, and the next one.
Because Edgar always said, I think he said this, that before you can be spiritually awakened, you have to do the research. Research first.
Yeah, and that's why our name is the Association for Research and Enlightenment. And whether it's research about, I have problems with allergies, how can I get well? And then I try it and it works. Or research about, who am I and why am I here?
But as you say, if you're here to learn whatever it may be, the basic stuff first, then you can't go to this, higher level stuff until you've done the basics.
Yeah, I don't want to limit anyone. I think that if someone does whatever they're supposed to do, then it opens up the door to the next one. I don't think that it would be very rare for someone to have an entire lifetime where they're only supposed to learn one thing. I think it's multifaceted.
But you could say that's how religion is. It's just one book, one truth. Go beyond that truth, you're punished, in a sense.
You could. I would like to say that the main purpose of religion is to bring people together in community.
Yes, it does that.
Which is, can be very helpful. I think the main purpose of spirituality is to give people a personal relationship with the divine, which is different than religion.
What was God from Cayce's perspective?
He said that the divine was multifaceted, and you could define it in two different ways. One, a very loving parent who was ultimately aware of what was going on in your life and concerned. Two, an all-pervading force, energetic force that undergirded everything. So this is going to seem really far-fetched perhaps to some of your listeners, but from Cayce's perspective, there is nothing but God. Everything is a part of God. There is nothing but God. And we're all a part of that.
So God is just a word. It's dog spelled backwards. It's a word we're using right now as a way to talk about this thing that's the everything.
That's the everything.
Yeah. We're using human words still, right? That's what we can do, right?
Yeah.
But it may be something much more where it was the originalness of what we are, and maybe we've subdivided to have this experience now.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think that basically what happened is that we decided to take on a limited consciousness in order to bring spirit into that limited consciousness. But there's a part of us that never left God, that's still a part and attuned with the divine. I often describe that if you can think of your soul as your hand, then right now your little finger might be the personality you're exhibiting. But there's much more to you than people are seeing or even that you're aware of yourself.
Do you think that even in this timeline right now, there's other aspects of yourself that's out there, of your soul, that's having different incarnation experiences compared to what you are?
I think that your soul is having all of its lifetimes at once, yes.
I guess that's maybe what I'm asking.
Yes.
Yeah. That's very difficult for some to get in their head. But then again, it's been something that's been said for a long time now. Do you think as we progress and as time goes on, we're going to see there's going to be newer truths or new understandings that come through other people that we've never even considered before?
Absolutely, because I think our understanding of truth is a growing thing, and I think that both science and spirituality is going to grow closer and closer to an understanding that there's just one energetic force in the universe, and everything is just somehow a different vibration of that one force.
Where does discernment come into any of this? Because I think we have to use discernment on this path. Yeah, it's a tricky one because if the channels that I've met are only doing it from love, my discernment is, well, there's nothing that really feels wrong with what they're saying. There's nothing negative about what they're saying. But even something negative, is that wrong sometimes?
To say something negative to someone, is that wrong?
Am I asking that? Well, okay, I've never come across a channel that says anything negative to me, right? I've heard of other channels that have, and that would get my alarm bells ringing, right?
Yeah, I think that the best approach is to meet people where they're at and to give them whatever morsel of information which will help them on their own next step. Gina Sermonara, who wrote the book Many Mansions, which was one of the early books on reincarnation, she was a psychologist.
Great book.
She used to say that, one of the best psychic gifts is knowing when to keep your mouth shut. That somehow, you can't necessarily say everything you know on someone, because that can be an overload. In terms, you need to work with whatever they can handle and go from there.
Yeah, and some people you could upset very easily doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
No one wants to do that. Yeah. Very true, very true. Is there anything that you might like to add here as well?
Absolutely. I would just encourage your listeners, wherever they are, that regardless of where they are in the world, that there are helpful insights that in the Cayce material that they can take advantage of for no cost. And one of our mottos here has been that we're here to help people change their lives for the better, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And we do that in many, many ways through our programs and activities.
I mean, I'm here all day, and just going to get some extra footage, and I think it's, from what I've seen so far, it's an amazing place. I've wanted to come here for so long. I will be honest with you that when I first started the channel, something calling itself Edgar Cayce came through for me, and he told me that at this time, in this place right now, that he was going to help me just to push me along in my journey to become a channeler. I thought, well, we're making some crazy stuff up right now. why do, you know, where's that come from? Am I going to go with it? Why would I want that to be the case? And, you know, it was made aware to me that there was some previous incarnations before where, you know, we'd worked or helped or something like that. It wasn't made too clear to me. And it was his voice that came to me when I first started to channel. And he was part of this team that I was bringing through. That's right, he called himself an aspect of Cayce. So he never said he was Cayce, he was an aspect of Cayce, which I always found interesting. And that's probably one of the second or third times I've admitted that on this show, actually. But I don't bring him through now. It's more of a case he's there, or he helped us in that beginning stage. Can I prove any of this? No.
Well, I think that if the Cayce you encountered was someone who really wanted to help you and help you get in touch with your own spiritual self, then in all likelihood it was a part of him, because I think that's what he was all about.
It was very loving. It was really a loving energy, and now I think I'm just channeling my higher self. And I think, you know, if it's just some part of the brain that we've not worked out or whatever it is, I think it's much more than that, right? It's amazing what we're able to do as individuals.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, we all are a part of the Spirit. We're all a part of God, and therefore we have all those qualities deep inside of us, and the goal is to somehow share them with other people, to help them become whole and better, just as we're doing the same thing in the process.
What was Cayce's most important message, do you think?
That God loves you. That God loves you, and that life is a purposeful experience. I often say, you know, if I had to say what are the three most important ideas in the Cayce material, it would be the oneness of God, that somehow we're all a part of this one force, the spiritual nature of humankind, we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, somehow bringing spirit into the earth, and life is a purposeful experience. There's a reason we're here, and there's a personal reason and a global reason, and so I think people need to be up and doing to somehow help bring spirit into the earth.
Well, Kevin, just thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Well, Kevin, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I would recommend anyone to come to the A.R.E when they can do in Virginia Beach. It is an amazing place, so just thank you for what you're doing.
Absolutely, and then go to edgarcayce.org and get there virtually.